focus on cloud and colocation, data center industry trends, and dynamic market. Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I'm really excited to be joined again by Pete Jones. Pete is the Chief Development Officer and founder at Yondr. Pete, great to see you.
Good to see you again, David. It feels like forever ago, but also only yesterday that we were together in Dallas in February 2020, and little did we know what was really about to unfold at that moment. So yeah, great to see you again.
You bet. And, you know, it's been really fun to see how much Yondr has done in those, 15 or so months since we last connected on video. Maybe if you could give everyone a brief background, from your standpoint, like how you kind of grew up in the data center space, because you have been in this industry for a long time. And then maybe just provide a quick overview of like some of Yondr's key highlights over the last 12 months or so.
Sure. So maybe the company first. So Yondr, we are a privately owned developer, owner, operator of data centers. We play in kind of two principal areas. One at the hyperscale level, and so to put some bounds on it, the tens, hundreds of megawatts. In more proven markets where there's a big picture of demand. And then also at the smaller scale, so helping folks enter new markets where there's a bit of gamble to be done on small scale deployments day one that are scalable. So typically these are parts of the world where there isn't a lot of colo.
Yes.
So it's additional capacity to approximately zero that exists. What we really don't do is play in the colo space. There are many other people a lot better at us than running colos, and we don't need to be adding to that pile. So we pin ourselves at both those ends of the spectrum. We've got about 1,500 megawatts of powered land under control that we're bringing to market. That has been really a monumental effort of the team, because that's across 3 continents. And when I last saw you, I was wondering how we were going to go about this. And we could say all sorts of things like work harder rather than actually work smarter rather than harder. We had to change our ways of working entirely. So at least 2/3 of that capacity has happened during COVID. So the idea is that we have the largest portfolio reasonably possible of near-term capacity for all of our clients. By way of headcount, we've got about 300 heads across 3 continents at the moment. And, like a lot of folk, we just can't hire fast enough. So that's the canned version of what Yondr is today. In terms of myself, I suppose all my career has been in the data center industry. I started off as an electrical engineer, on the design side, working really all across Europe. I was with Digital Realty, and it's kind of formative years in Europe. Then spent some time at Google as a principal there in the space and power acquisition group, and also site selection and so on. And then in Q4 18, we reckoned there was a good play to start Yondr. At that time, we didn't really have a name. We were wondering what we were going to do. We teamed up with our main investor, who's a family office out of Houston in Texas. And that was really a formative moment. And our kind of gamble at the time was there is a super normal level of demand coming. Mm-hmm. And there are some good places where it can be fulfilled. But, really we were getting a number of inbound client demands saying, can you help in insert name of metro or country. So that was really the founding moment of Yondr. And we've been on a roll ever since. From very small, modest beginnings, we're now at the scale that we sometimes never dreamed we would be at. But nonetheless, we have that scale of portfolio. We've got a great team, and really 2021 in particular has been transformational for us, and really excited to be heading into 22.
Well, right on. And, it's been, as I mentioned, fun to see the type of industry talent that you all have really brought into the Yondr group. People are so important. And so what I want to do first is talk about the Europe data center market. Obviously, this is, you all are right in the middle of this. And so I wanted to highlight maybe some trends that we've seen at Data Center Hawk and get your thoughts on some of the real-time conversations or trends that you're seeing going on in the market. So one very interesting trend, if you think about the big markets in Europe, the 5 major markets, we've seen the vacancy rate drop over the last basically 8 quarters from like 11.4% all the way down to about 7.5 as of 3Q 2021. So for us, it just shows the continued demand, not only on the smaller enterprise type requirements, but also this big hyperscale demand. Another one we've seen just the record pre-leasing related to like absorption, both in 2020 and 2021. It's our belief that the 2020 growth was already happening, and then with the pandemic on top of that, really just created an environment that if you could find capacity, that was a really valuable thing. But what are your thoughts on that, and does that kind of jive with what you're seeing in the market today?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you mentioned first there, almost that the seeds of that takedown of capacity were probably sown, pre-pandemic, and some of this has been kind of pent up, right, in the sense that the demand was pottering along, and those megawatts were taken down. The ability for folk to make megawatts ready, through the pandemic and so on, has, if you like, I suspect that's probably, affected the vacancy rates that you're seeing, because additional capacity has been slowed up. The 5 markets you talk about, your Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin, coincidentally, 3 of those places are where there is either an active moratorium or talk of one. Amsterdam has been in for a couple of years, various talk about how that's going to pan out. There's talk of one in Frankfurt, and there's talk of one in Dublin. So kind of, perhaps not massively surprising that, in the biggest centers of demand, that is where the industry is getting so much attention and focus. Not of the best sort, So I'm not terribly surprised by those quant numbers you mentioned. I think what we've seen in the markets more broadly is, it feels right now kind of, I wouldn't say hyper competitive, because that sounds, that would probably be an exaggeration, but what did we see happening kind of pre-pandemic? Well, we saw that there were some new players emerging. Some of them have been successful, some of them haven't. COVID aside, we've seen some failing projects, some late capacity, some things which are chronic in all of those markets, as in megawatts that potentially will never be delivered. Then you add in on top of that, so you say if that was approximately the status quo pre-pandemic, then we've seen this influx of all of this new capital. There's only so many really good places for that capital to go. So we've seen even more competitors start up. And the resulting effect that we've then seen on client behavior is, well, in a world where projects are failing to deliver megawatts or are chronically delayed, and there's even more choice of questionable standing, right? Because there are only so many good places for capital to go to be usefully deployed. At the same time as there's never a time where clients have needed more capacity, the level of caution has gone up. So it's this weird kind of contradiction in the sense that clients are screaming out for more capacity, but they've been burned a number of times, and they've got people knocking on their video conference door, not literally their physical door, during the pandemic. So it's this weird function of hesitancy on the buy side, because not wanting to make a bet on necessarily a new player who, yes, has all the capital in the planet, but maybe doesn't have execution capability, but simultaneously needing this capacity, urgently. So for me, when I think about it from that perspective, it's not a big surprise that the demand is piling up. There are stockouts occurring in the metros. It feels like a temporary phenomenon, right? Because it feels like that there's a necessity that some of the new entrants won't be successful, right? Yes, all of the charts that express demand are up and to the right, and that's all great. But it's still finite, right? It's a big number, but it's still finite. So, yeah, we've seen this temporary phenomenon, which I think from a different angle complements or explains, from my perspective, the top line data points that you mentioned for sure.
Do you mentioned just around the size of requirements, one of the things it feels like I'm seeing is like the value of like, this is more like real estate focused, but the value of like sub-market growth, meaning, you take a market like a Northern Virginia in the U.S. and you've got like Ashburn, then you have Manassas, then you have Leeds, you have all these different areas, and and you could probably say the same in like a market like a London. You've got, Slough, and if capacity if there's power issues maybe there, you're starting to see movement to other places, like physical little locations where clustering can occur. Are you seeing that in different European markets?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that most of our clients they're planning for new markets is much more careful. And what I mean by that is, so like you say, pick some part of London that is very tricky to get capacity today. Mm-hmm. What a lot of our clients are saying to us is, if I only knew when I planted my first tranche of capacity way back when I planted that flag, that it would wed me, to some notional diameter or radius. From that, I would have made very different decisions. Yep. So it's a phenomenon that we're definitely seeing. I mean, I think seeking perfection is probably a pipe dream, right? Since you're now where you plant your flag now, you're probably thinking more about, how do I get within a radius of this flag to X many hundreds of megawatts? Yeah. Which, let's face it, 5-6 years ago was simply not really in anyone's outlook. So we're definitely seeing that these kind of sub-markets are necessary from a diversity perspective, traditional diversity. We're seeing, some financial services regulators actually requiring minimum diversity between facilities. Mm-hmm. And then there's the brutal reality of availability of, power in particular. So it's definitely a real phenomenon. However, we're seeing some surprising phenomena or some persistence. So Frankfurt, arguably, it's very, very tough today to get energy at any real kind of scale. We've got a 40 megawatt campus in Berlin, and I think what some of us thought at the time was, it only needs to get marginally harder in Frankfurt before we'll see spillover into Berlin, which is a fairly agricultural way to look at it, because it's an entire another region for most folk and so on. But I suppose my observation is, it is a surprising level of persistence to exhaust every single avenue and get every single kilowatt out of region or sub-region number one before spilling over into anything. And I know there are, massive day one costs, to start new regions and so on. But like I say, an example like Frankfurt, where it has never been more tough, some folk are, using these market forces to derive really super normal, crazy prices, but it still persists. So again, I have this kind of feeling of tension between, yes, there's an effective dose of diversity for medium to long-term growth, but at the same time, the tolerance for elevated rates, potentially elongated lead times to grow in place, I've never seen a higher level of tolerance for those. Another phenomenon we're probably seeing is consolidation moves. And I guess, say, we're just about to announce our campus in West London, in Slough. So that's 100 megawatt critical across notionally 3 buildings there. And most of our conversations with clients are around consolidating out of kind of janky, fragmented colo portfolios, which is an interesting conversation, because it goes something along the lines of, whenever we're talking about lead time for capacity, how much, when, and so on, the answer is always, well, it depends. It depends how quickly I can contractually get out, physically get out, and migrate into something else. And it feels like these are some of the firsts of this really happening. So, in terms of where am I going with this, I'm going, the absolute scale of megawatt requirements and scalability that we're seeing have never been higher. And, it's typically two sides of that one coin. Either give me somewhere I can consolidate my janky fragmented colo portfolio, or give me somewhere that I can genuinely grow into over the medium term, so I avoid having a janky colo portfolio.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's, the preventative move and also the consolidation move are something which we're seeing in all of the big metros, so your flap D, but also, new metros that are evolving. It is not around just get me the cheapest KW that I can get into day one. It's, yes, get me sensibly priced KW day one, but tell me a growth story that I can really believe in.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it feels like that is the challenge, or the big challenge in Europe is figuring out, hey, how can we scale up over time and do that in a way that customers probably can really believe in. How are you seeing some of the power pricing changes like impact, or just the perception around that impact growth in some of these European markets?
Yeah. So, thinking about the energy piece, I mean, all the good sites are gone, right? Or all the easy sites are gone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Any site that is lying around that, has permits and, unlimited volumes of water and a substation next door, those are dreamland.
Doesn't
today.
exist.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So, I think there's from the CapEx side and from a lead time perspective, as far as electrical infrastructure goes, that is more expensive and it's harder and the lead times are longer as a general phenomenon. But on the energy side, I suppose, recent events in Europe have these price shocks, right? So we had this gas related price shock, which was largely reflected, directly and indirectly also in electrical energy price shocking. And the weird thing, well, it's not weird. It was weird to me initially, but it now I've rationalized it makes sense. The conversation immediately spun into renewables. As far as data centers go, and you say, well, what is that? What has an energy price shock, a complete externality to our sector, got to do with renewables appetite within our sector? And of course, when the penny dropped with me, it's because if you have a portfolio of long-term fixed price PPAs, you have a forward-looking price protection against energy shocks, right? So if I had a huge demand portfolio and 80% of it was made up of fixed price long-term PPAs, well, my exposure is only the differential that was sitting on the spot market. So, almost inadvertently, the renewables and particularly bilateral PPA play has provided this price insulation, of course, then price being reflected in the cost base of our end users kind of implicitly. And because I think a lot of the debate that we have is around additionality, are green tariffs good or bad? Should end users be doing it? Should colo operators be doing it? So on and so forth. But not that I can really remember, was there ever really a commercially led conversation which says this is a good way to buy forward positions in energy markets, full stop. And that is a good enough reason in its own right. So that has kind of shifted, right? And I think even if you don't believe in renewables or don't believe that in your part of the value chain, it is the right place to be, say, being a bilateral PPA off-taker, it still leads you to an energy portfolio management question where you say, okay, so if it's not long-term PPAs, how do we provide protection to ourselves and to our clients in some more sophisticated way than just saying all of my energy just rides on spot and we'll just eat these, either eat these price hikes or we'll have to pass them on.
Pass them on, yeah.
Yeah, I guess there are some folk potentially exposed in this, right? People, in between their energy supplier and their client, if they're not rebilling and it's of any sufficient scale, there could be people having really bad days right now. Fortunately, I mean, virtually all of our portfolio is rebuilt, and to the extent that we also commit to clients that where regulations permit, we actually allow them to be the off-taker so that they can manage it within their own portfolio and not have some sort of mismanaged third party in between. But like I said, it was a really surprising discovery that a unforeseen gas shock would prompt a very deep renewables discussion. I never thought it would occur, but it has.
Where are some of the other markets that you feel like are maybe growing in popularity related to growth? Like one thing we see in the U.S., like I don't think we see this trend in the U.S. like we see in Europe, meaning, the large amounts of like capacity traditionally in the U.S. have gone to like bigger places, Northern Virginia, Chicago, Phoenix, Dallas, those type of markets. We don't see, huge amounts of power requirements ending up in, like a lot of secondary markets. I would say in Europe, it seems like there are some large demand discussions happening in, some secondary areas. And so I don't know, from your standpoint, maybe what's driving that, and where are some of those areas that you're starting to see like more activity taking place?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we probably bucket, flap D on most of North America. We kind of consider those as approximately the same, or certainly similar.
Sure.
And then, a couple of places in Asia Pac, but really, the proven demand centers we bucket together, and then there's everywhere else.
Yeah.
And which kind of sounds like a brutal oversimplification, but it's how we make bets, right? So we're not going to go do 100 meg project in the most nascent metro in the world, right? It makes no sense. But we have to be in Virginia. We have to be in London. So it's part of our decision making, right? There are places we absolutely have to be that are chosen markets, and then there's everywhere else. So from a global perspective, where are we seeing? In approximately Europe, we're seeing movement east, for sure, and that's out through Eastern Europe, and then into the Middle East, and the characteristics are largely the same, in the sense that they ask from clients are, help me open new regions in these places, help me do it safely, don't tell me about supernormal levels of execution risk, guarantee me that this is not going to be a problem to me. And by the way, I'm going to think carefully about planting my 3 flags. I'm going to plant them day one, and I want to be able to grow into them. So, that is true in most of Eastern Europe as we creep out, then into the Middle East, and similarly in some interesting places in Asia. Your Bangkoks, your Vietnams, some of your Malaysia. That's to be proven yet. Alternates to Singapore, well, that'll be an at-scale play. I think probably most folk would agree. But, there's a lot of unexplored territory in Asia, but again, the story is broadly similar. Help me get in cheaply and let me test the waters, and don't make a mess of it. And then, of course, we look to South America, and the story is the same there, right? So there seems to be a new level of almost entrepreneurial aggression from the cloud players of saying, 3 or 4 years ago, my bar for entering a market was maybe up here. There seems to be more risk appetite to say, get me in there quicker at small scale. My day one costs are lower. Help me do it quickly, and I'll take the risk of being the first mover. So like I say, creeping out Eastern Europe, pretty much anywhere in Asia that is not an established at scale market, and similarly in South America. So it's a lot of horses to keep in the race, that's for sure.
Yeah, another thing that's really interesting about our space is, I would say these large users, is just their growth ability. When they go into a new market, I don't think people maybe outside the industry understand the scale at which these users can grow, and the impact that has. If you look back to some of these like bigger markets over time, a lot of their growth has been because of those big users, but then also companies that want to be close to those deployments for one reason or another. In some of those smaller markets, there's a longer timeline to something like that. But the investment that those companies make is just so massive, even on kind of that smaller scale. And then you think about it over time. It's really exciting. You mentioned some of the markets like in Asia, some of those secondary markets. And I think probably I would imagine the challenge for the developer is, hey, how can we, we've got these great relationships with customers. We need to make sure we get it right. And you made it's like you need to almost provide an easy button for them to grow. And if you can do that, obviously this is to your point, oversimplifying it, but there's a long pathway and a lot of opportunity in a lot of places. That's how it seems like to us right now.
For sure. And, I think also the locations are different as well, right? I mean, I think there are a handful, I would say, of cases in which you've got some sort of cable landing station and there is a large hundreds of megawatts in very close proximity. I think for most of Europe and most of North America, that's largely untrue, right? There's not this magnetic effect of, CLS on a beach somewhere and then, before you know it, there's 500 meg of capacity.
Sure.
I mean, that's largely untrue. I think it's fair to say. I don't think the same is true for new cables coming in, in new markets where actually say, well, do you know what? Aside from some very obvious places where there's a massive population that you say, actually, it's better to be closer to the population, than it is to connectivity. But we're seeing, if I claim that it's largely untrue of the causation between CLSs and very large capacity deployments or, anchors of deployments in Europe and North America, I genuinely don't think the same is true. We're seeing outliers already down the African continent, I think a couple of examples in South America. So the problem statement is even qualitatively different. So it's help me get in, all of the things, do it safely, don't make the pricing crazy, make my life easy. Oh, and by the way, the places that we need to put it in look really quite different from established markets of what you're used to doing. So, I mean, it's not a tremendous problem. It's just an evolving phenomenon that I think everyone is learning on together, right?
Yeah, and I think it impacts the where the capital goes and how maybe, you as a data center owner, developer, think about, hey, where are we going to deploy our capital? Over a period of time, how quickly can we get a return? All the things that are the important side of like the development part of the business. But I think it's been fascinating to watch from our standpoint, just because even at the small scale, getting someone into a place where they haven't been before, even that small scale amount can be big, when compared to other places. So it's interesting.
It is, but I think your point around financing is a good one. So we are not going to go around pouring concrete and building shells in some of these crazy new markets. It's the wrong thing to do. I don't think there are enough concrete signals, except if we're going to pile into, there's a trend at the moment for everyone piling into Lagos and Nairobi. We're not going to do that for now. But I suppose the reason for mentioning it is that typically the real new markets, there isn't a lot of colo around. Mm-hmm. And what colo there is either pricing that clients really don't like, lead times that are unsavory, or quality that would not support a 2021 and onward deployment. So you're into this territory of saying, okay, how do we get more capacity there? Well, I could go build some type of a colo. Great. The minute you start talking to anyone on the finance side of the house, or you agonize yourself and you say, okay, show me the business plan. Well, it's a complete gamble. How much liquidity is there in the market? Zero, because there's a couple of old telecoms assets that no one's ever moved out of. And by the way, there are a couple of hundreds of kilowatts. So, a lot of these functions are simply things that we haven't really had to think about before. I go build a colo today in, insert name of developed market. There's loads of liquidity. There's very high transaction volume. You can kick in the doors of the bank and people give you all the money you want. The same is not true, right? So then you're in this place of saying, do I do something which, is either very bold or very reckless, depending on your view of the world, of taking a punt on, throwing a dart at a map and saying, I'm going to go pour some concrete and build something speculatively in place X. Well, that's great if you've got absolutely unlimited access to capital, but it's almost irreversible, taking concrete down or trying to exit something because you got the metro wrong, the country wrong, or the wrong side of the metro.
Yeah.
It's kind of irreversible. So, the pre-let phenomenon you mentioned, I don't think it's just commercial optimization. I think it's a real necessity for these new markets because, someone needs to make the first move. And I think what we're seeing is now, particularly the big cloud operators are more willing to make that gamble, make that bet, which is supporting people like us, supporting them, get 3x small deployments safely in new markets. So there are a lot of things we simply haven't had to think about before. And I'm not too kind of afraid to admit it, because every day's a school day, but it really feels like being on the leading edge of something. We're learning together with our clients. We pull up our location intelligence platform and we kind of agonize over it together and say, oh, well, is it this place? Is it this place? Is it north? Is it south? Because the canvas is blank. So, it's exciting at the same time.
Okay, so Pete, one of the interesting things that Yondr has done over the last 12 months has entered the U.S., which is actually really interesting because we don't see a lot of European data center operators coming to the U.S. So talk about why Northern Virginia was the place that Yondr wanted to plant the flag and start U.S. development.
Well, I suppose it was never our plan, and hopefully it's not our future plan, to be the last one into any particular market and just making people's lives harder, and no one needs another player. I suppose we came across an opportunity in a joint venture, which was such a large amount of capacity that we could potentially be offering to market. That was the compelling thing. North of 500 megawatts is what we're talking about in the places you want to be. So it was an opportunity-led phenomenon, really. I guess, we were never going to enter, just with another 30 megawatts last in, without some real longevity there. So it was opportunistic. Now, we've got some great competitors, in Virginia, for sure. But I think the short answer is to the other side of our bet, the demand side bet, is still people can't get enough.
Yeah.
So, I don't feel like there's a zero sum game that we are going to be, fulfilling megawatts for the sake of, or at the cost of our competitors. The demand signals are just so strong. And as you alluded to earlier, the notion of sub-markets and sub-regions still in all the places you really wanted to be originally in Virginia is where everyone still wants to be. So, like I say, a combination of a great opportunity and also, clients saying, give me more, give me more, give me more. I wish there was like a sexier answer, but I'm afraid that's about it. But, you're right. We did raise a few eyebrows whenever we were coming the direction across the Atlantic that is very rarely trodden. But, our philosophy remains the same. Is we're not going to pitch up and do kind of one building in a market which is already very adequately served by our great peers in the market.
Yeah, and if there's a market to have a long road of capacity, I mean, Northern Virginia certainly would be one at the top of the list. We're at least what we're seeing with, and where we think like 2022 will be. I mean, multiple projects that are over 10, 20, 30 megawatts that are looking in the market. Mm-hmm. So we really think like in 2022 in a market like Northern Virginia, it's going to be, really strong from a demand side of things. And so that makes a lot of sense. If we switch back to Europe and think about 2022, what do you think like at the end of that year we'll be talking about related to trends and things happening to like the European data center market over the next year?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll maybe kind of talk about Europe and very promising parts of Asia Pacific together.
Sure.
Because I see the trajectory. There may be a little offset in time, but broadly speaking, I think they're going to follow one another. So, I think to pick up on your point there, right, Virginia, right, there's going to be a whole pile of deals at whatever you said, 30 megawatts. I think that's really a signal we're seeing replicated globally. That is the transaction volume is going up of these big deals. So arguably the liquidity is going up at the same time. And the two good things come from that is we're going to get faster at doing these deals. Mm-hmm. There's more precedent. There's more standard paper. Because at the minute, a lot of requirements at this scale are taking, 12, 16 weeks, maybe longer, just to paper them.
Yeah.
Which in a demand focused world, and you can't get the megawatts soon enough, you'd far rather not be taking 3, 4, 5 months to do them. So I think that maturity you speak of I think simply volume, and because the reality is here, right? The more people we get having done these deals, they can train more people to be more competent people overall to go execute on these deals. So I think it's a really healthy phenomenon that, 12 months from now, let's say there's another 30, 40, 50 deals of this nature that have gone through. I think it's going to be a great maturity signal for the sector. And I suspect that's a global phenomenon. I think some of the new markets we will see stood up, in particular, there's got to be an alternate to Singapore, right? I think we'll see, and we've got some ideas ourselves. We've got to see how that's gonna play out. India is booming. Probably a third of our book leases will probably come out of our campuses in India next year. We're going to break ground on Mumbai for 60 megawatts there. So in the Asian theater, I think we're going to see some markets really establish themselves. In Europe, that creep east that I spoke of, we're going to see that. I think it's going to be at smaller scale, these careful moves, but it's not one careful move. I think there's going to be a double-digit number of careful, day one moves. The Middle East, I think, again, we're going to see this. I think we're going to see true markets reveal themselves. We've heard a lot of chatter. There's been some colo, traditionally in Dubai. You in conversations that we're party to, the conversation about Middle East is a little bit like Southeast Asia. You tend to hear like 3 countries talked about in the same breath. And it feels like, do you know what, at some point, someone's going to have to make a bet. And where someone bets, everyone else will follow. So I think we will see that start to occur. And I think a similar phenomenon in South America, right? So I think that's where we're going to see demand maturing and or appearing. Unfortunately, but I think it's a logical thing that's going to happen, I think it's inevitable that some of the new money that has tried to place itself in our sector, there is a point in time at which people will give up and, or potentially who were badly advised, that some of that money that's been knocking on the door may well disappear. Unfortunately, I think just from a statistical perspective, there will also be some players who will fail to deliver megawatts full stop. And that may lead to some particularly more recent startup folks not being around. And I take absolutely no glory in that at all. But sure, the reality is these things have not gotten easier to build and deploy.
Yep.
As the markets have got more challenging, the people shortage, because the denominator of megawatts has gone up, but the supply of people hasn't really gone up. We've now got these supply chain challenges. And also, I can't help but think that some of the money that's poured in from genuine, robust infrastructure or really stable sectors has been badly advised as to the execution and operational risks that are inherent in our sector. So I take no glory in thinking that this will occur, but I think it would be naive for us to think that all of the capital that has knocked on the door will be around forever, and that all of the new players have established themselves will also be around forever, and that all the projects that are meant to be delivering megawatts will succeed at all, even if they're not chronically delayed. So that I've mixed feelings about mentioning that, but I think there's a certain inevitability.
Yeah,
and I also wonder, will the use cases of small scale deployments have evolved as well? I mean, you and I laugh about the buzzwords of edge, 5G, self-driving cars, IoT, which are kind of meaningless. I think we've always said that kind of edge is in the eye of the beholder. It largely depends what your core business is and what something is on the edge of that will define your use case. But it feels to me a little bit like when the phenomenon of virtualization was first floated. I remember being at data center conferences and everyone walked, virtualize this, virtualize that, and the other. Little did anyone know, really, at that moment in time, well, it's virtualization and so on, on VMware, original pioneers, that enables what we now know as either private or public cloud clusters, So it feels a little bit to me like that we know there are a couple of megawatt challenges in new parts of the world to be solved. And for me, that's all we need to know. But I really will be fascinated to see to what extent end users have progressed what these use cases really are. So I'm looking forward to it, right? I don't have any gambling money on it, but I'll be really interested to see what next year brings.
What I just want to ask one more question around just we've seen trends in the U.S. kind of impact Europe and Asia. Like one thing I always like to say is it feels like we're maybe 2 to 4 or 5 years ahead in the U.S. on some things that kind of make their way into some other markets. From your standpoint, are you seeing any trends come back the other way? Do you see anything that's taking place in some of those other markets maybe that is starting to make itself, known in more developed areas from a data center perspective?
I mean, a very dangerous thing for me to say would be regulation. I mean, we've got as we speak, COP26 is going on. But no, I think that's definitely another topic to lean in on. I don't know. I sometimes wonder that I think that the trends you speak of, right, in particular, scale requirements going up, expectations around timeline, quality, and even some of the technical trends. We've definitely been, I was going to say fast followers, but in the cases of some of our regions, probably slower followers than our end users would have liked. But I think you're right, those trends. So I guess I think about some of the complexities that we have on our doorstep in Europe. We got 20 something, I think 23 languages, 28 currencies, so many different legal and law systems. And I guess I think about how useful that could be for us all. Our default level of complexity that we deal with is fairly high. Maybe that's something that can help us all deploy capacity and operate in these seriously more challenging environments. So not a trend per se, but I wonder if that's where we can kind of help out. Some of the things which are frustrating about Europe in many different ways. Our default characteristics, level of necessary bureaucracy and language. Maybe that's something that'll stand us in good stead. And maybe in 5 years' time we'll be saying, do you know what? U.S. company expansion into Europe, was a great training ground for many of the other parts of the world that we have subsequently gone into. That's probably the only thing I could think of.
Right on. Well, I think your thoughts are really good. Thank you for taking the time to think through this and talk on, what Yondr's been doing. I'm excited that we'll hopefully get face-to-face before the next, 15 months. But Pete, if people want to know like how they can find out more, I'm assuming they go to your website. It's yondrgroup.com.
Yondrgroup.com. Yeah.
Awesome. And I would say this too. I would also say I feel like Yondr does a great job on content. I know y'all do, podcasts as well, and just put out a lot of different articles and discussions on kind of like industry led topics. And so I would just say from my standpoint, if you're looking to learn more, it's a great website to check out more.
Yeah, definitely read the content from my colleagues, unless you're having difficulty sleeping, in which case read some of my self-authored content, because there's a disclaimer there. It may well put you to sleep. But yondrgroup.com, and hit us up on LinkedIn as well.
Right on. Pete Jones, thanks so much. Great to see you, and look forward to the next year.
Thanks, man. All the best.